meeting. All right, we are now officially recording. So for those of you watching the recording, my name is Jen Gillick, and I am the program director at the American Parkinson Disease Association. I am with the Northwest chapter. I am super pleased to welcome all of you to this Beyond Medication series called Beat the Freeze. I am super pleased to have partnered with our friends at the Parkinson's Fitness Project, which is here in Seattle, where we're located. The Parkinson's Fitness Project is a really terrific resource for those with Parkinson's. They offer specialized one-on-one physical therapy, as well as in-person and online Parkinson's-specific fitness classes through their Daily Dose app. You're going to have two presenters for this 4-week series. Dr. Nate Coomer, who is the founder of the Parkinson's Fitness Project, and the fabulous Jennie Alex, who is a physical therapist there at the Parkinson's Fitness Project, and she joins us here today. So welcome, Jennie. Thank you so much for being here. Okay, perfect.
So originally from Wisconsin, always specialized in neuro. And then in 2015, I took a class through the POWER organization, Parkinson Wellness Recovery, and was really inspired to specialize more in Parkinson's. My grandfather actually had Parkinson's, and that course really taught me about the potential of people with Parkinson's to delay the progression of the condition through exercise. And so I was really excited when I moved to Seattle a few years ago to come here to the Parkinson's Fitness Project. And I'll tell you a little bit about our organization later on, but like Jen said, we offer a combination of in-person physical therapy and then also a virtual program from Daily Dose, called Daily Dose. So I am going to share my screen here. And let me just move this out of the way. Okay, so as Jen mentioned, this is going to be a 4-week series talking about freezing of gait. So roughly how it's going to be organized. Today, I'm going to give a little bit of an introduction on freezing of gait. Next session, we're going to talk more about different cueing strategies we use with patients. The 3rd week, we're going to really focus in on cognition, how that impacts freezing of gait, how we can train cognition in our sessions. And then the last week, we're going to kind of tie everything together from the first 3 sessions and talk about how to use these skills in the real world. Oh, so here's a picture of our team at the Parkinson's Fitness Project. This was at one of the APDA walks from a few years ago. Okay, so today we're going to define freezing of gait. We're going to talk about common situations that can trigger someone with Parkinson's disease to freeze. And then we're going to spend some time at the end, starting with one treatment strategy that we use, using weight shifting to break out of a freezing episode. I'm going to keep an eye on the chat during the session, but we'll save 10-15 minutes at the end for questions. So you can also use that time, but feel free to raise your hand or type anything in the chat as I go. So most of you probably know what freezing of gait is, but here's a more concrete definition. So freezing of gait is defined as episodes of disrupted forward progression of the feet despite the intention to walk. So how patients often describe it to us is they will say, my feet feel glued to the floor. I'm going to show you a picture or a video. This is going to show a gentleman. He's going to experience freezing when he turns. We'll talk more about that, but this is a common place that people freeze. So he's taking good steps, and then he gets to the cone, and you can see those feet are stuck to the floor. So sometimes people describe that little tremble in his legs that he was experiencing. Some people will say that they have a little stutter step. but often that sensation of being stuck to the ground. Number one, freezing makes people less efficient moving around during the day, but we also want to address it because it can contribute to falls. So why does freezing occur in Parkinson's disease? So these images are showing you, well, first of all, I should say movement is very complex. How we generate movement requires lots of different centers of the brain, and we take for granted how they're all working together until something goes awry. So this little green circuit is the motor circuit involving the basal ganglia. So the basal ganglia are deep in the brain, and it's responsible for controlling automatic movement. So things that we do without thinking about it. So if I were to walk to that cone, turn around, I'm not thinking about taking big steps or how I'm sequencing that turn. This motor circuit is just taking care of that movement automatically. So unfortunately, with the loss of dopamine in Parkinson's disease, some of these movements that you used to be able to do without thinking about it are no longer as automatic. So the example I like to think about is, let's say I'm getting ready for work in the morning and I'm walking around my house. That automatic motor circuit is this just in the background. I'm getting through my day, getting things together. My feet are just taking big steps. I'm picking up my feet during that turn and I'm not even thinking about it. So from across the room, my husband asked me a question. I'm able to answer that question, and just subconsciously, my feet are still stepping. All of a sudden, I look at the clock. I'm running late. I can't find my keys. I'm dealing with looking for my keys, bending down, and all the while in the background, my feet are still moving. I'm not having to think about that. So you can see in this second picture, with Parkinson's disease, sometimes there can be more interference. So you wake up in the morning, you're getting ready, and you're thinking about taking big steps. You're consciously, that blue center of the brain, you're using cognition, you're thinking about picking up your feet. And then your partner from across the room asks you a question. You turn to answer that question. You don't have that automatic drive to pick up your feet. So when your attention shifts to answer that question, then that's a time when your feet can get stuck. Similarly, you're getting ready, you're thinking, pick up my feet, turn and look for my keys. Oh my gosh, you look at the clock, you're running late. That pink center, your limbic, your emotional center, takes over, and then those steps stop. So it becomes harder to do two things at once. So then that makes sense. Oh, let's go to the slide. So we're going to spend the third week talking all about cognition, but I want to talk about it a little bit today because I think it's really important to understand why freezing of gait happens. So we're going to use this example of the picture of you're getting across a crosswalk. And I think, again, we take for granted how much our brain has to process in a scenario like getting from one side of the crosswalk to the other. So in individuals with Parkinson's, they can have issues with higher level executive function. So when you're going across that crosswalk, it requires a lot of visual spatial processing. You have to navigate through the crowd. You have to make sure you're staying within the boundaries of the crosswalk. And some of that visual spatial processing can be impacted by Parkinson's disease. Getting across a crosswalk also requires divided attention. So let's say you're in an unfamiliar scenario, you're trying to decide where the store is that you're looking for. So you're having to pay attention to crossing the crosswalk while also navigating and finding your directions. So divided attention can be more difficult with Parkinson's and can contribute to freezing. Set shifting is a challenge. So when you're shifting between two tasks, So you have to use one motor command to step off that curb safely, and then you have to shift to the pattern of taking big steps across the crosswalk. So having to shift between those tasks can be a trigger for freezing. And then finally, inhibition. So inhibition can be a challenge. So you're looking at that signal, you get the go to walk. So you're telling yourself to go, but then out of the corner of your eye, you see a taxi coming and you have to give yourself a no-go. You have to inhibit and stop in the crosswalk safely. So our brain is really processing all of these different things in this scenario, which is why this can be it can be tricky to keep big steps and manage all of those cognitive pieces. A little bit more about freezing triggers. So what I did on this slide is I tried to organize the triggers into different categories. So one thing to keep in mind is not everybody freezes in the same situations. So some of these might resonate with you, but some of these might be less of an issue. So the first category is a motor trigger. So certain motor tasks more commonly trigger freezing. So we saw in the video of the gentleman having to turn around. Turns are a common place that can cause people's feet to get stuck. Also initiating walking. So if you first stand up from a chair and have to walk across the room, sometimes people can feel a little catch or a stutter step when they have to initiate. They have to start moving. We talked in the last slide about a cognitive trigger for freezing. So multitasking, distractions, again, anything that's pulling your attention away from walking can cause freezing to occur. There's environmental triggers. So this gets back to some of that visual spatial processing, walking through doorways, over thresholds, walking in more crowded spaces. A lot of times people will say that they actually feel way better in our therapy gym because it's so open. So we'll have to sort of block off areas of the gym to create smaller spaces to recreate some of the freezing someone is experiencing at home. Again, there's this emotional trigger like we talked about. So stress and anxiety. If you're feeling more tired, you can be more likely to freeze. I was working with a patient the other day, and when he's at work and he has to rush to catch an elevator at work and it's crowded, kind of the stress of that situation, he finds his feet catching. And then the last thing that can contribute to freezing is being off on your medications. So if your medication is wearing off or is low, usually freezing is more common during those medication off times. So again, we're going to spend the next few weeks talking about how we address freezing of gait, but this is sort of where I start with people. So the first thing is we really want to build an awareness of where and when your freezing episodes occur. We want to really specifically train those scenarios. So if your freezing is happening when you have to turn around in the bathroom, we really want to address specifically what your issue with freezing is. The second thing we want to do is it's really important to optimize your medications with your neurologist. So like I said in that last slide, if someone is experiencing a sharp increase in freezing, we want to, and let's say every day it's happening at 3 or 4 in the afternoon, we might want to circle back and talk with the neurologist, because I find the most success addressing freezing is having sort of the medication and the physical therapy work together. Then we want to practice strategies. So we're going to practice over and over again. That man walking to the cone, we're going to practice that turn step over and over. And we're going to use those strategies to prevent freezing episodes, but also manage them when they happen. I found that the more we can practice and have some strategies to implement when you're freezing, the less stressful a freezing episode can be. Because unfortunately, it can sort of be a snowball down a mountain, that you feel your feet get stuck, you panic. That's a very, you don't feel in control of your own body. And then you end up sort of rushing, and that can contribute to falls. So if we can stop, adjust, and have a strategy to pull out of a freezing episode, that can make it less stressful. And I just think the more you understand why freezing occurs, again, it's hard to feel like you can't control your own feet. So the more you can understand why freezing occurs, I think that you can feel more in control in one of those episodes. I really work with my patients on setting expectations for the management of freezing of gait. And I say this because I don't know that I've never worked with someone where we completely eliminate all freezing episodes. And so I talk with people about, we want to be able to reduce episodes of freezing by 50%, shorten those freezing episodes, and not have that freezing contribute to falls. But I don't also want people to beat themselves up if they get out of bed and their feet catch a little bit in the morning. I always say we can't take Parkinson's away, but we can keep that freezing from taking over. And then finally, and this is we're going to talk about in the weeks to come, to really address freezing, we have to, like I said, practice some of those basic strategies in the clinic, but then we really have to increase the complexity of the training to make it applicable to the real world. So we're going to start with some basics today, but then there's this complexity piece. So we have to find a way to mimic some of that practice in more complex real world situations. Okay, so we're going to start and we're going to talk about where I start when I'm working with a patient who's experiencing freezing. And the focus today is using weight shifting. Again, those feet are stuck to the floor. And we're going to first talk, instead of preventing a freezing episode, we're going to talk about 3 steps that you can use when you feel that your feet get stuck. So this picture shows sort of a typical posture of somebody who starts to freeze. So you can see let's say he's trying to walk across a room to a chair, but he's gotten stuck, and the weight is often, as is in this picture, more in his toes. And what happens is his brain, he's trying to get to that chair as fast as possible. So his upper body starts to pull forward. His center of mass is getting over his base of support, and he's at risk of falling if he can't get those feet moving. So the first step, if your feet start to catch, is to stop and get your weight back in your heels and stand up tall. I think that's the most difficult part of managing freezing, is a lot of these strategies require you to move more slowly. So again, you're trying to accomplish the task, you're trying to get across the room, but a lot of these techniques require you to stop and do the skill a little bit more slowly. So it's really hard. As he starts to pitch forward, it's going to be nearly impossible for him to get his feet moving unless he stops, gets his weight back in his heels, and stands up tall to get in better alignment. So first step, your feet catch, you stop, and then you start to shift the weight. So you have to unstick those. So before I worry about moving forward, I'm going to shift my weight side to side to unglue them from the floor, and hopefully try to slowly work your feet farther apart before you can then unweight your foot to take a big step. So stop, shift your weight, and then take a step. So that's sort of using this reactively, but we can also use this proactively. So if I'm trying to get up, if I'm somebody that freezes when I start walking, I'm going to get my feet wide before I stand up. So I'm going to stand up so my feet are wider apart. I'm going to shift a few times and then take a big step. So I'm going to sort of proactively, and I'm going to train that over and over and over again. So that becomes just how I get up out of a chair. I get my feet wide, I stand up, I do a little sideways shift, and then I work on stepping across the room. So again, easier said than done. So we're going to take a few minutes to practice weight shifting. So if it was as simple as those 3 steps, we wouldn't, this wouldn't be such an issue for people. So let's talk about how we really enforce that weight shifting. So I'm actually going to stop the share so that I look bigger. So I practice weight shifting in all positions with patients because especially if balance is an issue and someone's fearful of falling, they're not going to feel very comfortable doing big weight shifts on their feet. So doing weight shifting in sitting, hands and knees, kneeling, we practice weight shifting in all positions. So feel free to join if you want with some of this practice, but I'm going to get your feet really wide. And we're just going to start practicing shifting your weight. And you want to shift your weight so much that you start to unweight your hips. We want to make this really dramatic. Again, with Parkinson's, that weight shift ends up being small and too fast. We want it a little bit slower and bigger. So now we're going to start to add a reach. So you're going to reach your hand down and across to the floor and up and over to the opposite wall. So big weight shifts, down and across, up and over, down and across, up and over. Good, we're going to switch to the other hand. Down and across, up and over, down and across, up and over. So we're just going to practice weight shifting today. We'll talk a little bit more next week about how we can use targets and lines and other things to make that weight shift even bigger. So that would be an example of a weight shifting exercise that I do in sitting. You don't have to get down onto the floor for this, but like I said, I think hands and knees is a great place to work on weight shifting. So I'll have people doing reaching side to side. And again, making that weight shift so big that you're getting that opposite side unstuck from the surface. I also like tall kneeling. So you have to shift and step your foot through and then come back. Shift and step your foot through. But now let's practice a few things in standing. So if it feels safe for you, I want you to come up into standing. You can hold on to a chair or something for balance. And so I want everyone to stand with their feet pretty close together. And you're going to practice a weight shift, keeping those feet really close together. Now, I want you to get your feet further apart, and you can feel how you're much more successful getting your feet further apart. So that's why one of our goals when you're stuck is to shift your weight and see if you can slowly work your feet farther apart. Okay, so we're going to practice some big weight shifts in standing. So you're going to come down with your hands in a fist, and you're going to reach up to one side of the room and come back down and shift to the other side. So we're going to come down and up, and keep shifting side to side. Now, if you're doing this and feel that you can't get to the point of unsticking your foot, I want you to practice that weight shifting holding on. We're going to have to get your balance a little bit better. So one thing I might start with patients is having poles or their walker. I'm going to give them a little bit more support because we want to practice this weight shift over and over and experience transferring your weight. Okay, so the next thing that we can start to do with a weight shift. Like we said, turns are commonly a problem. So we're going to start our weight shift just facing forward. And then it's kind of like a penguin walk. You're going to keep your feet really wide. And then I want you to turn and face the side. The whole time keeping your feet wide. And then you're going to turn and face back to me. And then we can start to get our arms involved. Or you can swing a pole side to side. I see lots of weight shifting happening. It's beautiful. Okay, you're going to shift your weight to the other side. Turn, turn, turn. Keep your feet going the whole time. Good. And then turn back and face me. So if that is a challenge, we would just start there. Again, making that a habit, practicing it over and over and over it again, till you can just do that weight shift without freezing. I'm going to give you 2 more examples of where I would take things next with people. So we can take that same weight shift we were just practicing, and we're going to set up 2 cones. So if you were at home, you could just put 2 glasses, 2 cups on the ground. So now I'm going to shift my weight, and I'm going to come around this cone. Yeah. So I have a crowded space, and I have to keep that wide weight shift coming around and through. So I'm just going to practice figure 8 through these 2 obstacles, keeping that weight shift the whole time. The last thing I want to talk about is using that weight shift to practice turning to sit in a chair. So like I said, start shifting your weight in sitting, then do it in standing, practice turns, and now we're going to actually use that turn to sit. So something that I commonly see with patients is they start to approach the chair, their feet get caught, and then they just dive and sit and hope they make it. So this is a skill where we want to be proactive. We want to use those 3 steps ahead of time. So as I approach the chair, I'm going to keep my feet wide, and I'm going to shift my weight. I'm going to turn, and then I'm going to sit. So one thing I do is I have patients set up 2 chairs across from each other. They stand up, they walk across the room, they turn and sit, and then they do the same thing back to the other side of the room. And they practice that over and over again. Again, the frustrating thing is that takes longer, but long-term it prevents falls. And if you can stop yourself from freezing, that few extra moments to do that wide turn to sit is actually more effective. So again, this is where we start. So you're going to see in the weeks to come, practicing a few back and forth with a weight shift, especially in a controlled therapy gym, isn't going to automatically translate to, for example, freezing going across a crosswalk. But I think these sort of introductory skills are really important, because we really have to, you're going to see that weight shift is kind of a key, and then we just add challenges to it as we go. So I'm going to share my screen for one more moment. Because I'm going to open it up to questions right now. Obviously, this is just week 1, so I'll answer what I can and then potentially say to be continued if it's something we're going to address in the coming weeks. But this is my contact information, so you can also feel free to email me. And like I said, here at the Parkinson's Fitness Project, we have clinics, we do in-person therapy in Leschi and Bellevue. And then we have our daily dose virtual program. It's $29 a month. And many Parkinson specialized exercise classes working on weight shifting and freezing and picking up those feet is something that we focus on there as well. So I am going to stop the share. I'm going to peek in the chat, but if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself. So believe it or not, Dan asked if he was talking about walking and chewing gum at the same time. That could potentially be a freezing trigger. And that would be a great therapy activity. So you have to figure eight through those cones while blowing bubbles with your gum. That would be your exercise. Yeah, and then Daniel mentioned, he said he's been stopping when he freezes, and he's been trying to take a big step, but he hasn't been doing that weight shift first, so he hasn't been very successful. The weight shift is the most important part. Like I said, think of like your feet like magnets on the ground. You have to spend a second to get them unstuck before they can move forward. Marianne talked about that she froze in a parking lot and someone came to help her and was kind of staring, which I'm sure made you more stressed, which potentially made your feet more stuck. I think another thing is working with care partners, so if you have a caregiver or a significant other, them grabbing and pulling at you when you're freezing isn't going to be helpful. So teaching them to give you those cues and helping you shift side to side instead of pulling you forward. I think that's most of the questions, Jen. I don't think I missed anything.
No, I don't see any other questions. Oh, something else came in. Do you see that one?
Yeah, so our strategies for freezing of gait, the same for people with Parkinson's who have had a DBS and get freezing of gait because of the DBS. Yeah, so we treat people for freezing of gait who have, this is sort of across the board. So other neurological conditions, you can also experience freezing of gait. There's like more vascular forms of Parkinson's. So the strategies to address freezing of gait are the same, no matter what caused it. Will working with weight shift help prevent freezing of gait? So yeah, so like I said, we can use these strategies reactively or proactively. So that practice at home, turning between two chairs, I would love if that became, if you freeze turning to sit, we want to be really proactive. When you go to turn to the chair, I want you to keep your feet wide and I want you to develop a new way that you turn to sit. If you freeze when you first stand up out of a chair, like we said, we want you to get your feet wide in sitting, stand up and shift your weight before you even start to walk. So you can use it to prevent a freezing episode and break out of one as well. Does freezing of gait impact driving or biking? So I would say sticking to the true definition of freezing of gait, we're really only talking about freezing when you're up on your feet. People can experience other like freezing, like cognitive freezing, the complexities of driving and all of that multitasking can cause some issues with motor freezing when driving. Bike, typically not as much. I'm going to talk a little bit about it next week, but I think aerobic training is really important to address freezing of gait. And sometimes people who are experiencing a lot of freezing, it's hard for them to walk at a high intensity. So getting on a bike and getting your heart rate up that way can help build up stamina and actually improve freezing of gait. Yes, Gary said he's going to practice. Again, I'm going to talk about it a little bit more next week, but if I evaluate a patient and they aren't freezing, one thing that I often do with people is get them on the treadmill. And again, we'll talk about it more next week, but sometimes someone can be moving around totally fine and we start to see hints of it on the treadmill. So I, if possible, really love all of my patients to incorporate some treadmill training as a sort of preventative freezing of gait exercise. Andrea said, does visualizing good walking help prevent freezing of gait? Yes, I think they've done a lot of research where they say if you're thinking about visualizing that turn to sit in the chair, just thinking about it, thinking about doing it with that good weight shift, actually you get similar activation in your brain as if you're actually physically doing it. So I think, and it can also help keep you calmer during an episode of freezing. Yeah, so Mariette said that some people who freeze feel like their thinking and cognition actually freeze as well. So we'll talk more about that. That's where it becomes really important. In week 3, we're going to talk about practicing. I think the really hard thing is being able to use these strategies appropriately in the moment. So Nate's going to talk a lot about how we take that simple exercise of walking between those 2 chairs, turning and sitting down, and we add a lot of cognitive load so you can practice managing in more stressful situations, and then potentially also training others around you so that they can cue you to shift your weight. Okay, Javier wants to know, is treadmill training better than training walking? No, not necessarily, but I'm going to save that. Like I said, I have a whole section next week where I talk about treadmill training. I think a combination of treadmill and walking is good. And it doesn't work for everybody, but one isn't, I guess. I think the thing about the treadmill is the belt is constantly moving. So you can maybe get away with a little bit of a stutter step over ground and it doesn't really disrupt things. But like I said, people who have hints of freezing, it really pulls it up on the treadmill because they can't get away with that little catch through their toes quite as smoothly. So Carla wants to know, is there a fast way to come out of a freeze in an emergency? I don't have, you would be using these same strategies. And like I said, the first thing is just stopping whatever you really do have to stop before you try and get moving again. And then, like I said, I guess hopefully practicing it enough to remove some of the stress of the situation so that you have something to focus on. I think sometimes what people do is they freeze and then they're just trying to pull their feet straight up off the ground and they feel stuck and then they panic more. So I think stopping and taking a breath and having something concrete to focus on can be helpful. Oh, okay, so Barbara wants to talk more about being on your toes. So it's sort of, like I said, there's 2 things that come into play. I think number 1 is with Parkinson's, it tends to result in a more forward flexed posture. So oftentimes the whole issue with being out on your toes is if I get my center of mass outside of my base of support, I'm going to fall forward. So I think being in a little bit more of a flexed posture can put you at risk for freezing. So we try to get people to walk a little bit more into your heels. And then I said some of it's cognitively. So my brain is sometimes working faster than my feet. I'm trying to walk across, I'm trying to get from point A to point B quickly. So I'm still moving forward, but my feet are stuck behind me. So the whole issue with being in your toes is if you're having the sensation that you're falling forward, you're not going to be able to get that weight shift. You have to stop, stand tall, get weight in your heels. When you're in that pitched forward position, it's going to be pretty impossible to get a good weight shift. Javier says he goes for a 1 hour walk with no problem. And then when he gets home, he starts to freeze. So fatigue is a big factor. So, I think looking at where you're at with your medication, the timing of your medication, is it coinciding with an off time? Or do we just need to build up your endurance so you're not reaching, that your legs are stronger, so that you're able to go for that 1 hour walk and still have enough stamina to not be freezing in your house? Yeah, Marianne was talking about stress. I always tell people I can't, there's a role for like mindfulness and breath work. But yes, it is impossible to remove stress from our lives. So I think that's some of what Nate will talk about is dual task, and how to hold two things in your brain at the same time. And so Kieran, you want to know about multitasking? Week 3 is going to be all about multitasking. And looking at the ground. So that's part of it, Marianne, that, I went back and forth about putting this in. So I agree that looking forward to the ground. So I have one patient, I worked with him yesterday. For him, looking upright, when he freezes, if he can stop and look upright, he has much more success with his weight shift. So we're going to talk about next week. We're going to go into more visual cues and how that impacts freezing. Any more questions? All right. Well, thank you all for your attention today. I want you to practice weight shifting. I want to see beautiful weight shifts next week. And like I said, this is just the foundation. So I don't expect you to be able to walk out of here and eliminate your freezing, but we're going to build upon it each week of this talk. But I think, you're standing and brushing your teeth, practicing some weight shifting, practicing that turn to sit are all good things. And then we'll add to it next week.
And maybe at the beginning next week, if anybody wants to report back about their practice.
Yeah, if anyone successfully uses a weight shift, I would love to hear about it.
Be awesome. There's one more last question that came in the chat. I don't know if you have time to address it.
Oh, the back pain question?
Yes.
Yeah, so any interference. So back pain, if it, like I said, sometimes with Parkinson's, because I turn to sit in a chair, I do not think about how I'm doing it. So we're teaching you a strategy to use the front of your brain. You're thinking about, okay, I'm going to get my feet wide, I'm going to shift my weight. But if all of a sudden, your attention is brought to your back pain, that's going to shift your attention away and could potentially contribute to freezing of gait. Back pain can also contribute to a more forward flexed posture. So that could also potentially impact freezing.
All right. So this is the beginning. We have 3 more weeks. We will be here next week, same time, same Zoom link. I will send the video as well as a PDF of Jennie's slides. Is that okay, Jennie?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
yeah, awesome.
Out to you. So you can watch this again. It can help you in your practice for the week. So I hope that you got some some start of practical tips for this issue that I know is an issue and can lead to safety and falls and all sorts of things. So thank you.